Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The United States buys 2 weeks to decide whether or not to join Israel's war against Iran, even as the conflict enters the second week. Both Tel Aviv and Tehran refuse to blink and accuse each other of bombing civilian sites. The European Union tries to reason with Iran, even as its supreme leader takes a hard stance. The Israeli military claimed to have attacked dozens of Iranian military sites overnight. Tel Aviv also claims that Iran fired cluster bombs at Israel with an aim to increase civilian casualties. Meanwhile, reports suggest that Iranian missiles targeted Israel's tech park in Beersheba that also housed Microsoft's office. EU ambassador to India added that there's still a window for diplomacy and Iran should seize it. Listen in.
One should not forget that the EU has been in negotiation with Iran on its nuclear program for years. That was called the JCPOA. Unfortunately, this preferred way of actually reaching a deal never materialized. The EU has made its position very clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, that we've continually said that Iran was not compliant with its own obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that there is still a window for diplomacy, and that Iran would be well advised to seize that window for diplomacy.
We believe these aggressions should be stopped as soon as possible. It could be done via international joint effort. Those countries like India, who are the voice of the South, the big countries who actually are in favor of peace, they should coordinate and put pressure on Israel. But I think at the first step, they should condemn this action not to be happen in the future.
To take this discussion forward, we are now joined by Major Dan Pfefferman, and a retired IDF officer and expert on Middle East. Major Dan, thank you so much for joining us on Global Eye. Let me begin by asking you, the European Union, Germany, France, these countries are going to sit down and talk to Iran today to see if there is a diplomatic way out. If they propose to Israel and Iran a solution out of this crisis to end the war, is Israel in a mood for accepting a diplomatic solution?
Hi, thank you for having me on the show. Israel would have been in the mood for any kind of diplomatic solution many years ago that puts an end to Iran's nuclear program, which is almost entirely focused on threatening Israel's very existence, on the ballistic missile programs, which, as we see unfolding this week and as we have seen over the last 2 years and well before, provide Iran itself and its army of proxies around the region a tool with which to terrorize Israeli civilians. And a path to get Iran out of its state of constant belligerency against Israel, whether directly or indirectly or diplomatically or economically. So the only reason that Israel attacked was because diplomacy was not putting an end to all of these threats. It is clear that Iran was getting dangerously close to the capacity to have both enough enriched material, plus it already has the capability with which to deliver it. And the negotiations from Iran's point of view were just a way to buy time while continuing to bypass or to skirt or to get around the NPT or the IAEA's restrictions, even per Iran's own commitments to the JCPOA. It's clear that it was just trying to buy time and find ways to continue sneaking closer and closer to a nuclear weapons program. So as far as we're concerned here in Israel, diplomacy would have always been the preferable option. But it was clear to us that Iran was never actually committed to diplomacy. And so Israeli leaders took the decision before it was too late.
So are you saying that whatever happens now in Europe in terms of negotiations between EU leaders and Iran, that is not going to be acceptable to Israel at all? Or will there be certain benchmarks, if achieved, then you will accept it?
I believe it's the latter. I believe that if certain benchmarks are achieved, as far as completely taking away Iran's ability to enrich uranium and the weaponization programs, which it was supposed to not be doing anyway, and the commitments to stop producing ballistic missiles that literally threaten our country. I mean, 2 missiles this past week landed within a kilometer of my house. These are meant for only terrorist purposes to terrorize. One landed on a hospital yesterday, right? So if Iran were in good faith and feeling the pressure that it's feeling now to come to the negotiating table, whether with the Europeans, whether with the Americans, or even under Indian auspices for, and commit to actually taking away these capabilities and abiding by agreements that it makes, Israel would be very happy, because war is always a last resort. We, the citizens, we, the country, we pay the direct price for it.
Right. In terms of the current escalations, the war continues. What's going to be next in terms of Israel's action to put pressure on Iran to eliminate its nuclear capabilities? What next can we expect from Israel in terms of stepping up the military action and also the intensity of weapons that are used?
So what we're looking at right now is a sort of an escalation ladder, an escalation plan. If I'm seeing what the Israel Defense Forces, the Israel Air Force is doing, is that they mapped out a whole series, a plan of what it essentially means to neutralize, to cripple, or to set back, at the very least, Iran's, first and foremost, nuclear program, secondly, its ballistic missile program, and thirdly, its general defense and intelligence infrastructure. The first part of it would have been to neutralize Iran's air defense capabilities, but Israel actually did that when Iran launched 2 separate barrages of 200 and then 100 ballistic missiles at Israel earlier in this year. And so in the reprisal to those Iranian attacks on Israel, Israel actually already took out Iran's air defense capabilities. And so the plan, the escalation ladder, had actually been moved up by about a week. What we can see now is that a continued degradation of Iran's missile capability, defense manufacturing capabilities. Iran produces much of its own defense hardware, whether it's missiles or UAVs. Continued attacks as much as possible on the weapons program, the nuclear program, recognizing that Israel alone doesn't have the capability to fully neutralize it, and if need be, to continue stepping up the pressure on the regime itself. Perhaps another escalation step that we could see is on energy or transport infrastructure, for example, on the Bandar Abbas port, which is a strategic port for Iran, or on major oil or gas installations. And so all of this is potentially still in play. Obviously, I don't have the plans in front of me, but you could continue seeing a ramping up both of pressure, but at the same time, a ramping up of neutralizing Iran's capabilities to wage war, and with the end goal that Iran does come back to the negotiating table with the whether it's the Europeans or the Americans, and commit in a verifiable way to cease its nuclear enrichment, nuclear weapons program, and its ballistic missile programs.
All right, Dan Pfefferman, thank you so much for joining us on the program, giving us your view on the escalations and what Israel could do next. Let's see what happens in the talks between European Union and Iran later this evening. We're going to take a short break, but up next, President Trump continues to claim he stopped India-Pakistan war after hosting Field Marshal Asim Munir in the White House. I caught up with D.P. Srivastav, ex-Indian envoy to Iran and author of the book Pakistan, Ideologies, Strategies and Interests, on what this means for India. You're watching Global Eye. US President Donald Trump hosted Pakistani Field Marshal General Asim Munir at the White House earlier this week. The meeting came less than a day after Prime Minister Modi had a phone call with Trump to clarify that no discussions were held with US on mediation or trade during Operation Sindoor. That's not all. Trump, while addressing the media, had claimed yet again that he had helped end the war between the two nuclear nations. I spoke with ex-Indian envoy to Iran, D.P. Srivastav, to get a sense of the American playbook when it came to India and also Pakistan's larger game plan and military doctrine. Srivastava was posted in Karachi in the 90s. He has recently authored a book called Pakistan: Ideologies, Strategies and Interests. His book traces the interpretation of ideology and elite interest in the making of Pakistan's domestic and foreign policy. I started by asking him to weigh in on the meeting between US President Donald Trump and Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir at the White House.
The luncheon meeting with the US president is being projected by both sides in the context of recent hostilities between India and Pakistan. But to understand it, you have to bear in mind the West Asian context. And let's go back a month. General Kurilla, the head of the US Central Command, in a testimony to US Senate, described Pakistan about a month ago as a useful ally in the fight against terrorism. Now, this is a very curious statement. America exited Afghanistan 4 years ago. There has been no recent catch of big terrorist figures, and they abound in Pakistan in recent years. So what explains this, this heartwarming commendation to Pakistan? I think you have to look at the developing situation in West Asia. Pakistan is an immediate neighbor of Iran. In case of hostilities or military action against that country, it can be very useful. And indeed, perhaps this has been in the works for some time, because you would recall then that in the midst of Operation Sindoor, IMF announced a fresh commitment of $1.5 billion to Pakistan under Climate Resilience Fund. This was in addition to release of a tranche of $1 billion under the existing commitment of $7 billion IMF undertook last year. This was not exactly a good signal to a country indulging in terrorism, but the current situation in Iran, if you work backwards, explains this generosity. Pakistan was being brought on board for any contingency that might arise, and of course Pakistan has always fished in troubled waters, and it is in deep economic trouble. It needs money, and it has already delivered. It's not a coincidence that on 15th June, one day after Israeli-Iranian war began, Pakistan closed its borders with Iran, except for return of Pakistani nationals. Now, you keep in mind the historical context. In 1965, during India-Pakistan war, Iran under Shah had provided Pakistan Air Force sanctuaries. And today, Pakistan has closed the doors, shut in Iran's face. So obviously, it has to be paid for services rendered.
Absolutely.
And that explains the context of this rare honor of being invited to the White House for an army chief.
Ambassador Srivastava, we'd also like to ask you about General Munir's position right now in Pakistan and why Pakistan went in for that terror attack against India. You've said in your book, and you've quoted General Zia-ul-Haq to say the professional soldier in a Muslim army pursuing the goal of a Muslim state cannot become a professional if he does not take on the color of Allah in all his activities. Could you give us a sense of what General Munir is now trying to achieve?
Let me first give you the historical context. You quoted from a book by Brigadier Malik, which is prescribed reading in Staff College Peta. And General Zia wrote the introduction. Brigadier Malik in this book said that terror is not a means to achieve an end. Terror is an end in itself. And this was the book which was being commended by General Zia. And mark General Zia's words, he was not talking about a Pakistani soldier. He was talking about a Muslim soldier in the service of an Islamic state. And that is the philosophy which also inspires which also inspires General Munir. He said about a couple of months back in his speech that he does not recognize anyone as Pakistani who does not accept Islam and Constitution. So religion obviously in his mind plays a larger role than the country's constitution. And he, in this 16th April speech, which was just a week before the Pahalgam terror attack, referred to ideology of Pakistan. He referred to two-nation theory. He said that Kashmir is the jugular vein of Pakistan. Now, the last two statements, there's nothing new. This was originally, these words were spoken by Jinnah, and it has been part of Pakistan's official creed since then. But, when you say that Kashmir is the jugular vein of Pakistan, it reflects Pakistan's obsessions with its own interests, not with the Kashmiri people. In the same speech, General Munir went on about the Baloch struggle.
Right.
And he said that, Pakistan would not allow it to succeed. So the ideology of Pakistan tries to impose a homogeneous religious identity on a diverse people and does not recognize the distinct national or linguistic identities of its people. And that is the genesis of the ongoing trouble in Balochistan. It tells you something about General Munir's mindset. And most interestingly, in the same speech he quoted Iqbal, he also made a reference to Palestine situation and described Israel as a Zionist state.
Right.
And today, he's being feted around in White House. And obviously the current context, which is being played out in West Asia, is a pointer of things to come.
Okay. Ambassador Srivastava, you've also spoken about how Pakistan's economy has been in shambles. There is an entire chapter in your book dedicated to the Pakistan economy. And you've also quoted Ishrat Hussain, former governor of State Bank of Pakistan, to say Pakistan has been a laggard in South Asia, facing episodes of boom and busts. The country has approached IMF for meeting balance of payment crisis 22 times in 30 years. Considering that the economy of Pakistan is in such a precarious situation, why do they continue going after Kashmir as a goal? How does this serve their national interest? You've also noted in your book that India is not a threat to Pakistan. We are not wanting to attack Pakistan, but Pakistan is constantly targeting India with terror, is constantly eyeing Kashmir at the cost of their own economy. Why is that?
It's a very pertinent question. Kashmir is an ideological issue for Pakistan, and this is reflected in the slogan that Kashmir is the unfinished agenda of partition. This has nothing to do with, the aspirations of Kashmiri people. It goes back to the two-nation theory. Now, this obsession with Kashmir has impoverished Pakistan, diverted most of its budget to military purposes. In his first budget presented by Jinnah in 1947, he devoted 70% of the budget to defense. And that situation continues in the recent budget, which was presented on 10th June. The army's budget, the defense budget has been increased by 17%, while the overall budget size has been slashed by 7%. And the contrast becomes even more stark when you consider that the development budget has been slashed to half. Now, the sum total of Pakistan's military budget and the debt service obligations exceeds Pakistani federal government's share of revenues, which means, in other words, that for rest of the government, that is other than debt service payment and defense, the government has to be run on fresh loans. How precarious is Pakistan's economic situation can be understood from the fact that it has reserves of foreign exchange reserves of $11 billion. this has been made possible because gesture by friendly countries to roll over Pakistani debts amounting to $16 billion, which had fallen due this year. So if those debts are called, Pakistan would immediately go into default. But despite this this precarious situation, almost like it's an addiction, and it serves Pakistani military's corporate interests. It serves, their sense that they are the ultimate, the custodian of the ideology of Pakistan, not just its frontiers.
Right. My final question to you, sir, is about the nuclear angle. Pakistan, as you said in your book, is developing tactical nuclear weapons and has now embarked on a full-spectrum deterrence. Considering that the threat of a nuclear war in the region is very real with what's happening between Israel and Iran, what do you think Pakistan's designs are likely to be, and how should India now prepare for the future? That would be my final question to you.
Let me point out two very odd things about Pakistan's nuclear policy. It has a first-use policy. In theory, that is also the case with much of the West, with NATO, with a difference that Pakistan combines first-use policy with what it calls a territorial dispute. In Europe, NATO and other EU countries, as well as, Soviet Union on the other side of political divide, agreed under Helsinki Accord that it will not use force to change borders. So Pakistan, by combining first use with territorial dispute, has lowered the threshold of use of nuclear weapons and made it more likely. Now, the second part is that nuclear weapons are supposed to be weapons of last resort. In every crisis, Pakistan flashes it right in the beginning to draw international attention. So this again lowers the threshold. Now, let me just touch on one point about recent Operation Sindoor. There was a statement by Pakistani ambassador to Germany before Operation Sindoor about use of nuclear weapons and so on. But once the operation got going, there was no such threat. Now, this really means something. It means that Pakistan's nuclear bluff has been called. Pakistan has traditionally used to hold out the threat of nuclear escalation to deter India's conventional strike against its sub-conventional attack. This is not going to happen in future. Coming back to, the Iran-Israel thing, there was Pakistani defense minister has made it clear that Pakistani nukes are for Pakistan's interests. So that is not going to happen. But the fact remains that in the past, it is proliferation of nuclear technology by Pakistan to Iran in early 90s, to Libya again in the 90s, and to North Korea, which has created this headache for the international community and the West, which is now mollycoddling Pakistan.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC-TV18. News continues on the other side.